part 4 in the What is Vision Forum series to just kind of wrap things up and bring it to a conclusion. So we talked about how Vision Forum imploded in 2013 and essentially disappeared from public view overnight. Now it's kind of relegated to, oh, it was a catalog company kind of providing homeschooling resources. But as you hear from the families who lived it, that's not the case. And Vision Forum Ministries, as is so often the case with churches or parachurch organizations, when they implode due to abuse, disclosures of abuse, moral failings, or whatever other reason caused them to implode, the people who trusted in them are left to bear the collateral damage. So the leaders move on. Sometimes they disappear from sight. Sometimes they rebrand. I live out in Seattle area. This happened with Mark Driscoll. The church imploded and exploded, really, and he moved down to Arizona and started it all over again and has a mega church down there with the same approaches, same problems. Sometimes, as is the case we saw recently with Carl Lenz and Hillsong, sometimes the leader will take a few years, they demonstrate, they have kind of performative penitence, and then they come back ready to start a new iteration of ministry. Often, sometimes if there's been marital infidelity, the pastor will come back now to start a ministry to people recovering from marital infidelity. And then there are people who just scrub their resumes, so they continue on in ministry, but they erase Vision Forum, they erase Mars Hill Church, they erase these things for understandable reasons, but they move on and maybe are replicating the same things. Doug Phillips kind of disappeared. The most I could find, he did a few things, like maybe attempted to do some filmmaking, some documentary filmmaking, but kind of disappeared, did not attempt to start another ministry as best as I can tell. Now, in my sleuthing, I am only going to focus on the people who are continuing to platform themselves as parenting, family life teaching experts. There are people who are in second tier leadership or involved at Vision Forum that moved on in different directions. And so I'm going to leave them be and put my magnifying glass on those who continue to propagate very similar teachings in the similar circles. Many of them speaking at homeschooling conventions, at family life conferences, many of them continuing to invest in self-created ministries that then use the internet to gain new followers and things like that. So let's take a look at a few of those. So this is Scott Brown. He, along with Doug Phillips, was the head of a movement for integrated churches where children and parents would be in church together. So you can kind of see some familiar names here. He basically started a ministry. There's networked churches with national reach. You can learn a lot by checking out the resources of these people to see what kind of teaching they're still doing. Some of it should look familiar. You can see aspirational views towards biblical womanhood, femininity, dominionist theologies, resources for children, touch points with culture war, as well as kind of a nostalgic and aspirational view of history. You can see different translations. I think, he's got some in Spanish here, so it can be accessible to Spanish speakers, and then pinging on culture war things of the moment. There's an upcoming conference. You'll see some familiar faces here. Paul Washer is an interesting one to me because he speaks at a lot of these conservative, patriarchal, homeschooling kind of conventions. Okay, and while I was looking up Scott Brown, I saw he spoke at this thing called the Homeschool Summit. So I looked at it, and y'all, it is a pay-to-play kind of summit. So there's no vetting. You just pay money, $3,000, $6,000, or $9,000 to speak, to essentially sponsor your place at the summit that gets you access to 85,000 subscribers. And I'm going to bet there's no vetting. When you look at the application, you're just filling out the application. So the obvious problems here would be anyone could sign up for this and buy access to families looking for teaching. And you can see the endorsements here from people who are like, I gained access to 1,000 new subscribers. But where does that leave families? Well, this lends credibility, right? Because if you're a new homeschooling family looking for help, well, this looks like, oh, maybe this is something that I can trust. So, wow, do Christian parents need to cultivate discernment? And here we have the McDonald's. You may remember Stacey McDonald. She wrote a lot of the resources for young women. So here we see she has a website with her husband. It kind of looks like Christian marriage coaching. There's some Bible verses. There's some kind of aspirational view of them as a married couple. But it's unclear what they're doing until you get down here at the bottom and you see do you qualify? And it's a multi-level marketing scheme. So there's an invitation here. There's the financial hook, the promise that you could make millions if you join their team. And it turns out that Stacey is selling essential oils and kind of a health influencer kind of lifestyle about being toxin free. So it's kind of a mixed bag because there's a little bit of spiritual authority going on in the Bible verses and the Christian testimony, but really this is just a pyramid. We also have Kevin Swanson. Now he started this ministry called Generations. I don't know, maybe it was around simultaneously when he was involved with Vision Forum, but you can see he is still very much speaking and producing resources, family life teaching resources, particularly to homeschooling families. He has scrubbed, as so many of them have, scrubbed Vision Forum from their resume, just included that they've been doing this for a long time or in various ways. And he has publications, speaking gigs, and you can see the topics are all related. Botkin Sisters, I had a little more difficult of a time discovering if this was very recent because they're posting about 5 years ago. They've got some YouTube videos, they've got some resources, but it was unclear to me whether this is something they're still actively promoting, which again gets to the confusion for people who've trusted when the leaders then move on. There's no public declaration of I don't do that anymore, for instance. And Vodie's probably the most familiar name to mainstream audiences. Dr. Vodie, I'm not going to pronounce his last name because someone kindly sent me a phonetic pronunciation, and I lost that comment. So we'll talk about Dr. Vodie here. This is just a couple days ago on Canon Press's Instagram page. He still enjoys a lot of mainstream visibility, speaking engagements, book publications, and all of that with Vision Forum scrubbed, of course, from his bio. So what is the current status of Vision Forum? Well, it's a mixed bag, right? The ministry's gone, it imploded. A lot of the leaders are still out there peddling very similar ideology in very similar subcultures. And others moved on without any sort of closure, which can be confusing because if you were part of communities like this, you would have heard things like, pants are, girls and women never wear pants. Public school is anathema. Stay-at-home daughterhood is the ideal, very rigid roles for masculinity and femininity. So then you all of a sudden have leaders who their kids are all in public school. They have, women are working outside the home. They're at a very mainstream church. This sort of thing is quite confusing when these principles were presented as gospel truth to countless families. And I would say the ideology itself is still quite popular. I mean, the Doug Wilson, Doug Phillips overlap, we'll look at it more because we're about to turn our attention toward Canon Press, goes way back. They knew each other back in Vision Forum days and were sharing credibility. And Doug Wilson continues to attract attention. There's I would say, a hunger for that kind of hyper patriarchy that is only increasing post-COVID and directly in response, I think, to a lot of the political, cultural things happening in 2019, 2020. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I also want to recommend a couple resources to you of people who have looked, historians and sociologists who have looked at these movements in greater detail. So you have Kathryn Joyce's Quiverfull. This is probably the oldest of the resources, and she does take a closer look at Christian patriarchy, including Vision Forum. Really recommended this one because it's kind of like a cultural history of the Quiverfull movement. So Vision Forum's included, but a lot of these overlapping circles. It's really well done. I am currently listening to this on Audible, and it is fantastic. It includes Vision Forum as one of many communities where women survivors are speaking out and shining light. And I just ordered this one from Julie Ingersoll, so look forward to reading to it. So if you want to learn more about Vision Forum or Christian patriarchy, check out these resources. I'd love to hear from you too if you think there's resources I should add and check out.